Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, I continue with a new video in the story of Tieu San and Hoai. Tieu San began to notice something unusual about her body through very small signs, subtle, yet persistent. Her menstrual cycle was later than normal, and there was a dull, lingering pain in her lower abdomen. It wasn't severe, but it was enough to leave her feeling exhausted and restless throughout the day. At first, she reassured herself that it was probably due to work pressure, sleepless nights, or the accumulated worries she had been carrying lately. But the longer it went on, the stronger the unease grew inside her, like a vague intuition that something was quietly going wrong within her body. In the end, Tieu San decided to go for a medical checkup. Sitting in the hospital waiting room, she held the appointment slip tightly in her hand, her eyes following every door as it opened and closed. The calling of patients' names echoed steadily, cold and impersonal. When the doctor called her name, Tieu San's heart suddenly began to race. As she stood up and walked into the examination room, her legs felt heavy, as if every step forward required all the courage she could gather. Under the stark white lights of the clinic, she sensed clearly that the result would not be as simple as she had hoped. The diagnosis was delivered briefly and directly, without any detours. Medical terms flowed evenly, but each word felt like a cold cut. Premature ovarian failure. Natural pregnancy was almost impossible. If she wanted to have a child, the only option was IVF, and it would need to be done as soon as possible, even though the success rate would not be as high as in other cases. The doctor's voice remained calm and professional, but to Tieu San, every sentence struck straight into her mind, leaving her thoughts completely empty. Leaving the hospital, Tieu San walked in a dazed state. Outside, the city was still noisy, traffic still crowded, people still rushing through their own lives, but to her, everything seemed to slow down. She felt as if she had just lost an invisible support, something she had never imagined she could lose. In her mind, countless questions surfaced at once, overlapping, unanswered. What should I do now? If I continue loving Hoai, if we get married in the future, would he accept a woman who might not be able to have children? If I hide this truth, am I being selfish? But if I tell him, will I lose everything? Those questions repeated relentlessly, clinging to her thoughts the entire way home. Tieu San understood very clearly that marriage had never been just a story of two people in love. It also meant children, family, and the unspoken yet heavy expectations from those around them. Thinking about this only made her heart feel heavier. The image of Hoai, a man who always looked tenderly at children, who smiled for a long time whenever he saw a complete family, surfaced in her mind, tightening her chest. Holding the medical report in her hands, Tieu San finally felt fear spreading through her chest. It wasn't only fear for her health, but also anguish about the future and the choices she was about to face. On one side was the bare truth, one that could change everything in ways she could not predict. On the other side was silence, preserving the current calm, but carrying with it long-lasting guilt and unease. She stood between two painful choices, unsure which path would hurt less. Meanwhile, CEO Hoai knew nothing of what was happening. He was still immersed in his work, back-to-back meetings, important decisions, and the constant pressure of being the one in charge. Their usual messages of concern, their brief phone calls, continued as always. But Tieu San knew that behind her composed voice, a storm was quietly rising. Just as the clues about Tieu San's biological mother had begun to surface, not yet fully revealed, the secret about her health became the deepest, most painful wound of all. She felt as though she were standing at a major crossroads in her life, where every choice carried heavy consequences. And Tieu San knew that whether she chose to speak out or remain silent, from this moment on, nothing could ever return to the way it was before. After many sleepless nights in a row, Tieu San gradually came to understand something she had been avoiding for a long time, she no longer had the courage to keep facing it. During those nights, the room sank into silence, lit only by the dim glow of the night lamp casting pale shadows on the wall, accompanied by Ivy's steady breathing beside her. Tieu San lay facing the window, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness where thoughts flowed endlessly, piling one upon another. She loved CEO Hai, loved him with all the sincerity and gentleness she had. And precisely because she loved him, she could not bear to be selfish and keep him by her side while carrying a secret that could become a lifelong burden for him. The more she thought about it, the more Tieu San believed that leaving might be the only way to protect the man she loved. Not because her love had faded, but because it was too deep. So deep that she could not bear the thought of one day seeing sadness flicker in his eyes when faced with dreams he longed for but she could not give him. She feared the unspoken questions, feared the prolonged silences between them, feared the guilt that would cling to him whenever he thought about the future. Leaving, to Tieu San at that moment, seemed to be the only way to end that cycle of torment, even though she herself would be the one to bear the greatest pain. Early one morning, while the city was still asleep, Tieu San quietly packed her belongings. Outside, the sky was still covered in a pale gray haze, the street in front of the house empty, with only a few yellow streetlights not yet turned off. The familiar house was immersed in a suffocating silence. Every item she picked up brought back old memories, moments that once felt ordinary, but now made her hands tremble. Tieu San arranged everything neatly, as if she didn't want to leave behind any sign of disturbance, as if she had never been there, never entered his life so deeply. Ivy was still sleeping soundly. Her face was peaceful, her breathing steady, her small hands resting lightly on the blanket. Tieu San sat down beside the bed, gazing at her child for a long time, as if trying to engrave that image into her heart. She leaned down and gently kissed Ivy's forehead, struggling to hold back the tears welling up in her eyes. In that moment, her heart ached sharply, as though it were being crushed. She dared not wake her, dared not say a single word aloud, only whispering silently in her heart the things she could not bring herself to say. She was afraid that if Ivy opened her eyes, if she called out even once, all of Tieu San's resolve would collapse. Without noise, without farewells, Tieu San took Ivy's hand and left the house that had once been filled with memories. The door closed softly, almost without a sound, yet to her it was the heaviest sound she had ever heard. Every step away was slow, as if dragging the past along behind her. She did not dare to look back, because she knew that if she did, even just once more, she would not be strong enough to keep going. On the desk, in the familiar space where Hai usually worked, there remained only a hastily written note. The handwriting was uneven, trembling like the heart of the person who wrote it. Those short lines carried all the weakness, helplessness, and love that Tieu San could not say to him directly. Hai, please don't look for me. I don't have the courage to stay. I hope you can forget me and live a truly happy life. The piece of paper lay quietly in the empty room, like a final farewell, without tears, without resentment, leaving behind only a silent sorrow and a love that had never once faded. When CEO Hai returned home, the familiar house suddenly felt chillingly empty. There was no longer the sight of Tieu San busy in the kitchen, no longer Ivy's clear laughter echoing through the living room. The silence was so deep that he could hear his own heartbeat. A wave of unease struck him the moment he stepped inside, as if something had left forever, leaving behind a void that could never be filled. Hai's eyes stopped at the table where Tieu San usually placed her things each day. On its surface lay only a thin piece of paper, resting quietly amid the familiar orderliness. He picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. Just a few short lines, yet every word felt like it was crashing straight into his heart. In that instant, Hai felt everything inside him collapse. His heart sank to the bottom, heavy and hollow. Without stopping to think, Hai frantically began calling. One call, then another, then dozens more in quick succession. But all he heard in return was the cold, mechanical voice. The number you are calling cannot be reached. Each time he heard it, panic tightened its grip on him. Hai started moving through the house, opening every door, as if Tieu San and Ivy might suddenly appear somewhere, as if this were all just a misunderstanding. But the house remained silent, devoid of the familiar signs of life. In his turmoil, Hai immediately called Hung and Hoai Ca. His voice was urgent, unable to hide the fear within. On the other end of the line, both of them fell silent upon hearing the news. No one understood why Tieu San had left so suddenly, nor what could have happened to drive her to such an extreme decision. All they could sense was that something very serious lay behind her disappearance. No one dared to speak the fear quietly taking shape in their hearts. They quickly split up to search. Familiar streets, places Tieu San had once frequented, everything was retraced in overwhelming anxiety. Hai drove without stopping, his mind in chaos. Images of Tieu San and Ivy kept flashing through his thoughts, intertwined with the note left on the table. He was afraid that if he was even a moment too late, he would lose them forever. Amid those familiar places, Hai suddenly thought of the beach. The place where they had once walked hand in hand along the sand, where they had shared their simplest and most sincere words. The place where Tieu San had smiled and said that just being by his side was enough. The thought struck him, tightening his chest. Without hesitation, Hai turned the car around and drove on instinct. The road ahead seemed endless, and within him was a restlessness he could not shake. When he arrived, the sea wind blew fiercely, carrying the familiar salty scent and the steady, unending sound of waves. In that vast landscape, Hai suddenly saw a familiar figure. Tieu San stood there, her back to the sea, her slender frame looking far more fragile than he remembered. Her hand was tightly holding Ivy's, as if afraid that letting go for even a moment would cause everything to disappear. Hai walked toward her, each step heavy on the sand. His voice trembled as he called her name. Tieu San did not turn around. Her shoulders shook slightly, silent tears falling, blending into the sea wind. She stood still for a long time, as if gathering all the remaining courage she had left. Finally, Tieu San spoke, her voice hoarse from holding everything in. She told the truth she had buried for so long, the illness, the near impossibility of having children, the fear of becoming someone selfish who held him back. Each sentence came out broken, as if saying one more word would cause her to collapse. She did not dare turn around to look at Hai, afraid she might see disappointment in his eyes, or worse, pity. Her voice broke, swallowed by the sound of the waves. I don't want you to sacrifice your entire future just because of me. As soon as those words left her lips, Tieu San felt as if her heart were being torn apart. It was the pain of someone who loved but did not dare to hold on, of someone willing to walk away just so the one she loved could be whole. Hai did not speak immediately. He stepped forward and tightly grasped her hand, the grip both strong and trembling, as if afraid that letting go would make her disappear again. His voice dropped, firm and unmistakably clear. I love you, not because of how many children you can give me. For me, all I need is you and Ivy. She is my child. Those words became an unexpected anchor, causing every defense inside Tieu San to collapse. Standing by the windswept shore, she broke down in sobs. The tears she had held back for so many days were finally allowed to fall. For the first time after a long period of fear and torment, Tieu San felt that she was allowed to be weak, allowed to lean on the person before her without worrying about tomorrow. Amid the steady crash of the waves and the salty wind blowing past, the three of them stood together, as if all the loss and panic they had just endured had led them to this very moment, a moment of truth, of love, and of a choice that no longer had to be made alone. Hai drove the two of them back in a heavy, wordless silence. Throughout the entire journey, no one spoke much. Tieu San sat in the back seat, one hand tightly holding Ivy's, the other resting in her lap. Her eyes looked out through the window, yet her mind seemed to drift far away. Familiar streets passed by one after another, but this return felt completely different. It was no longer the familiar sense of peace, but a cautious acceptance mixed with exhaustion and an unease she could not yet name. When the car stopped in front of the house, Hoai Ca and Hung were already there. Seeing Tieu San and Ivy step out, both of them showed clear relief, though worry still lingered in their eyes. Hoai Ca stepped forward first and gently embraced Tieu San, not a tight hug, but one warm enough to convey a sense of safety. Hung stood beside them, his voice calm and steady. He did not blame or overwhelm her with questions, only spoke slowly and sincerely. They urged Tieu San to stay, to give herself more time, reminding her that running away was not a solution. Some pains, no matter how far one runs, must eventually be faced. Hoai Ca reminded Tieu San that she was not alone, that love was not about perfection, nor about carrying everything by oneself and then leaving in silence. She deserved to be loved, to stay, to share her burdens, even if life was imperfect, even if the future remained uncertain. Hung added, his voice low but firm, that some things could not be endured alone, and that choosing to stay was not weakness, but another form of courage. Tieu San listened to everything without arguing, but she did not nod in agreement right away either. She knew those words were true, yet her emotions had not settled. What she had just been through left a quiet aftershock inside her, not loud, but lingering. After all of it, Tieu San decided to stay. Not because her fears had disappeared, but because she understood that leaving again would only make everything more tangled and painful. Things gradually settled into a fragile calm. The rhythm of life in the familiar house slowly returned, though it was no longer whole as before. Tieu San tried to remain composed, tried to smile for Ivy, tried to respond to the care of those around her. But deep inside, her worries still quietly existed, never truly leaving. The illness was still there, a cold reminder of the limits of her body and the things she could not control. The future ahead remained unclear, filled with decisions she could not yet name and choices she was not ready to face. At the same time, the clues about Tieu San's biological mother continued to linger quietly, not clear enough to become truth, yet not gone enough for her to forget. Everything intertwined like undercurrents beneath a seemingly calm sea. On the surface, the wind might be still, but underneath, movement never ceased, waiting for the moment it would rise. Tieu San understood that staying did not mean everything was fine. Staying was only the first step of a long journey, one where she would have to learn, little by little, how to face the things she feared most. There were nights when Ivy slept soundly, and Tieu San sat alone in the quiet room, listening to her own breathing, wondering whether she truly had the courage to keep going. She was no longer running away, but the unease remained, smoldering and persistent. Would Tieu San have enough courage to face the road ahead, where love was accompanied by unavoidable trials? Where would the clues about her biological mother lead, to a truth finally revealed, or to a new wound not yet healed? And would CEO Hai's love, sincere and steadfast as it was, be strong enough to help her overcome everything still waiting in the future? All of it remains unresolved, lying quietly ahead like a bend in the road whose end cannot yet be seen. Stay tuned for the next episode to discover what happens next in the story.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay mình định làm video. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều. tạm biệt mọi người, hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video tiếp theo ở trên kênh của mình nhé. Bye bye.